Psalm 18, David is, I, I don't want to make everything symbolic and everything an exaggeration for the sake of effect. Everything is not necessarily those things, but a lot of what David is writing here is hyperbole and is highly metaphorical and symbolic. And yet, for David, a warrior, a man of war, in a time in world history where a lot of life involved war. I guess here's what I'm not doing very well with my connecting my thoughts with words today, but we sometimes tend to look at Scripture through a lens of our experience in the 20th and 21st centuries. And that's not sufficient. I mean, it won't work well. And the reason is obvious. When David wrote this, it wasn't the 21st century, for crying out loud. All right, enough. Verse 28. Talked about this already. You light a lamp for me. The Lord my God lights my darkness. And then he says in verse 29, in your strength I can crush an army. With my God I can scale any wall. This is military talk and ancient military talk. Israel's history, I just in my morning quiet time reading, I just started Joshua yesterday, and it's a fun book because it's narrative. It's historical and all of that, but it's a narrative of how Israel took possession of the promised land, and God instructed them completely destroy the nations and possess their land. It wasn't kind and it wasn't pretty, but that was life in those days. I don't have the mental capacity today to go deeply into the whole thing about the history of the world and military history. But when David says, in your strength I can crush an army, I don't think he's saying, put me in one against 5,000 and I'll take them. That's not what he's saying. What's the point? Two things. In your strength. That's the first thing. Where does our strength come from? We talked about that last time, and we don't want to distort or pervert the concept, but our strength comes from the Lord. Remember verse 1? Maybe you don't. I love you, Lord. You are my strength. Well, now David says, in your strength, I can crush an army. I think that's hyperbole. With my God, I can scale any wall. I think this is not so much boastful talk as it is very confident talk. And whose confidence was David settled in here? He was drawing from his own confidence? No, he was drawing from a confidence because of his assurance that God was his strength. Then in verse 30, God's way is perfect. All the Lord's promises prove true. This is a big idea. First of all, the Lord is perfect. Now, the idea, the word perfect here, we have a fairly one-dimensional definition for perfect, without flaw. uh, no mistakes. And there is that here. But it also could be translated complete. In the book of James, where James says about when we encounter trials, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, when you encounter trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. And perseverance must finish its work in you, making you mature and complete, not lacking anything. Well, King James Version is making you perfect. The completion, the concept is you're whole, you're complete, no gaps, no unfinished, no yet to be finished anything. Okay. God's way is perfect. And this is hard for me because there are a lot of times I really like my way. You know what I'm saying? God, I love you and all, but let's do it my way. Well, that never works out well. And when David is talking about God's way, he's talking about God's design, his law, his will. And it wasn't a fuzzy thing for David. For David, God's way was well defined by the law, beginning with the 10 words, the 10 commandments, and then the expansion of all that through the book of Leviticus and Numbers, and to a degree Deuteronomy. God's way is perfect. My little motto for my counseling practice is helping you find your best life by discovering God's design and living within it, because God's way is perfect. Nobody that I will say one couple, I counseled one couple in all my years of counseling who came to me because they just wanted to get a little tune up and have another set of eyes looking in at their marriage and their parenting and offer them insight. And to be honest, those were the most fun counseling sessions I think I've ever had. Because they weren't dragging in their problems. And I don't make fun of people who drag in their problems. Everybody's got problems. And if you're wise, you'll drag those in where somebody can give you some help. Okay. The reason I see counselees is because, well, it's never just one thing, but this is one of the things, is they don't know God's way. And if they know it, they haven't engaged it. God's way is perfect. Really? Does that mean that when I follow God's way, it's always going to work out great? I don't think so. My sense is that doesn't. No, that's not what he's saying. But his way is perfect. Okay. And then all the Lord's promises prove true. There are at least two kinds of promise. One is unconditional, and one is conditional. If you're employed, one of the promises of your employer is that they will pay you a certain amount of money when you perform the work. Okay, that's conditional. If, then. And there are many of God's promises that are conditional. There are dozens and dozens of if promises. Okay. But some are unconditional. That his promise is sure. He makes the promise, and the only condition is his ability to fulfill that promise. Now, some promises are made to everyone. They're universal in nature, but not all promises. And this can sometimes create difficulty. Maybe sometime I'll come back to this whole thing about universal promises versus very personal promises and specific promises to specific people. But enough to say, all the Lord's promises prove true. And often, his promises prove true over time. It often takes time for God's promises to prove true. I don't like that. I wish I'm kind of more of a microwave kind of guy. But I don't grow that way. His promises prove true. He's a shield for all who look to him for protection. Now, that's a promise, is it? I think it is. It's a principle. He's a shield for all who look to him for protection. You know, we know this propositionally, but sometimes not so much experientially, that God is our shield. And when we look to him for protection, he will protect us. Except, what about World War II and the concentration camps and Christians today who are being persecuted and murdered? How does that work? I don't have a satisfactory answer to that. I don't have an answer to that satisfies me, at least. And yet, the principle is true. When I look to him, he's my shield. One of the big things I see is he shields me from Satan's intentions. Jesus said, the thief, and he was talking about Satan, comes only to steal, kill, and destroy in John 10:10. Well, Jesus said, though, I have come to give them life, real life. King James Version says abundant life, or life abundant. Well, God, when we look to him, he's a shield against Satan's intentions toward us. Does that mean my life's going to be just sweet all the time? You know better than that. No. But imagine, as the crummy things that have happened in your life, when you look to him, he is your shield. And when these rotten things happen to us, we have no idea, we really don't, what could have happened to us, how bad it would have been if God had not been our shield. Man, I just feel like I didn't even make sense to myself today. I'll try to do better next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.